Welcome to the Being Human UT podcast, where Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigus will discuss issues relative to the humanities and technology at Utah Tech University. And now your hosts for Being Human UT podcast, Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hindigus.
Welcome to the Being Human UT podcast. I'm Randy Jasmine with my co-host Jim Hindigus, and we're back again talking to you about the intersection of humanities and technology. We're very happy today to be joined by a guest who has spoken here on the Utah Tech campus a couple of times in the last couple of months. His name is Sylvester Johnson, and he is the director of the Center for Humanities at Virginia Tech University. He's also an associate provost for public interest humanities, and he really is someone who has a lot to say about the very theme and topic that is, the foundation of this podcast, the intersection of the humanities and technology. So, Sylvester, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. It's great to see you both, and very grateful to be invited on.
Jim, I know you've got some questions that you have been formulating. Why don't you kick us off with a discussion point?
Well, thank you so much, Sylvester, for joining us for this podcast. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I thought it was very, obviously forward thinking. This idea that we're moving into a fourth industrial revolution, and so what when you talked about maybe the more dire aspects in the beginning, then you transitioned into what we're doing, and even specifically what some of the things that Utah Tech is doing for the new workforce. There were just a couple questions that I had in thinking about your presentation. One of them was this concept of inequality. And I know inequality and inequity are not the same thing, but I might be conflating them at times. But you talk about especially wealth, in this issue of inequity of wealth. And then later on, you talk about how we are transitioning in higher education to students into private industry. And I know a lot of people sort of blame private industry as a possible cause of wealth inequity. And so I'm just wondering, how would you address those concerns where people might think, well, private industry is actually a possible problem of all that wealth disparity?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question and for your nice summary of the talks. It was a great pleasure to be able to be out at Utah Tech and spend time with you and the community there for a couple of occasions now, and look forward to doing so again in the future. So the issue of inequality, of course, is what I described, as many others have observed for a long time, as the grandest of grand challenges, perhaps. That it's certainly on the very short list of some of the most difficult challenges that we have to face, and that's up there along with things like the environmental integrity of our world, and the different challenges that we have for ecological sustainability. And then there are other big challenges as well. You think about all of the shifts that are happening in macroeconomics globally. But certainly, to your question, I like to think about this in a very precise, more practical way. If you think about our students, why do they come to be part of higher education? Why do they pursue that? And there are many reasons. I think that if you sit down and talk with any number of our undergraduates or our graduate students, and you ask them what they are most anxious about over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years, overwhelmingly you will hear, especially if you're talking to a junior or senior undergraduate, they will talk about their concern that they have for being able to get a job, to participate in the economy. They're about 1/3 of our students on university campuses in the United States are actually experiencing food insecurity and housing insecurity. That's 1/3. That's the average. And I know that if you ask a lot of our faculty and our staff to think of in their mind to share with you their imagination of the average student. That imagination probably goes something like holding a couple of iPhones that cost $1,500 each and driving a nice car and living with granite countertops, because we didn't have granite countertops when we were students, and now they have all the luxury student housing, right? That idea exists among the faculty, and some of that is true. There are students with iPhones and granite countertops, but the point is that for most of the other students, they're dealing with a lot of insecurity, financial insecurity, and a lot of uncertainty. And of course, if you ask them whom they want to be hired by, most of them don't say a university, because most of our students are not aspiring to become professors or to work in a public sector. If you take away private companies from potential employers, you leave people very little to work with. In other words, if we think about this from the perspective of those whom we claim to serve most primarily at our academic institutions, those are our students. If we think about this from their perspective, the last thing any student will want to see is the disappearing of private companies, because that's how most of them are going to be able to do what we do, what Sylvester Johnson does. Sylvester Johnson works for paychecks. I have an employee, he's Virginia Tech. I have health insurance. I'm able to, because I have a job and I don't wonder on payday whether I'm going to have a paycheck. It goes there automatically. It's not even a piece of paper, it's electronic. I can pay for a place to live. I go to the grocery store, I swipe my bank card. I don't even think about whether I'm going to have enough money to pay for my groceries. And I can go home and feed my family. We can eat together. And we wake up every morning not wondering whether we're going to get evicted. So I think if we start there, I think that it becomes clear that we should not treat private companies as enemies. If we are serious about what we say, that we're here to serve our students, and we say that we're preparing them for the future. So I don't want to ramble a long time, but I just start there. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems that private companies have created. There are tremendous problems that private companies have created, and a lot of those things are where do we begin? You could talk about the unevenness in the employment, of the opportunities for employment. So companies have had a long mixed checkered history of fair access to employment. We could look, and we're going to talk a lot about technology, I suspect. So we can talk
Oh,
about
yeah.
John. But we would be wrong and unfair to reduce companies to their problems, just as we would be wrong and unfair to reduce higher education institutions to their problems. Utah Tech stands out because Utah Tech has tackled the affordability crisis and made learning more accessible, and is also an open university, open admissions. That's not true of where I work. That's not true of most of higher ed. Most higher ed institutions create a difficult barrier to access, but it would be wrong to reduce higher ed to that and treat us as only places that make it hard for people to access, because universities do a lot of good in the world. So that's where I would start. I think if we're willing to be fair and nuanced and not reduce things to their problems, we can solve the problems and still elevate the value that all of these institutions, private or public, can deliver.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up on that question, because as you were talking, I thought back to your talk here in November, and you talked about the collaboration that can take place between private companies, businesses and higher education institutions, as far as education and credentialing and, helping our students to learn in the new technological environment in which they exist, because those challenges are new to all of us. So could you talk a little bit more about that idea of how that collaboration might take place?
Absolutely. So one of the great things about the polytechnic universities, and I was mentioning in my talk there, Utah Tech, some of the important work that Utah Tech is leading through its example and what it embodies. So Polytechnic is not just, well, let's prepare students for an economy in which there is a large role being played by technology and technical skills. Technology is not just technical, it's comprehensive. There are lots of things required. But it's also how should institutions partner with private industry? And so that includes lots of different sectors of the economy. And in order to, or industry broadly, so that's private and public, uh, in order to optimize how we structure the learning that we deliver. It's not just about whether our students are going to get jobs. It's also about how we prepare future talent. And so there are incredibly important and urgent opportunities that all of our universities and colleges have to work very closely with, I'm going to say industry, because that includes private companies and includes government, public institutions, civic organizations, and companies are for profit and not for profit. There are lots of opportunities to work closely with industry to do something that I think most of our institutions are probably reluctant to do, and that is to change not just what we teach, but how we teach. And I'm happy to say a little bit more about that because we've had some beginnings of exploring this at Virginia Tech. There's a lot of it happening at Utah Tech, and that is just really working with industry in order uh, to change the way we introduce students to concepts and learning. And a clear example of that is studio-based learning that's project-based. And that is uh, attempting to solve a problem. And those problems can be shaped. The students that are working on can be shaped with industry. And we can even invite industry into that studio space to help us to work with those students.
Thank you.
Well, I want to explore this idea of comprehensive. I mean, I know that, you know, when we really adopted this idea of an open, inclusive, comprehensive polytechnic university, you know, there was an initial, you know, concern of, does comprehensive really mean what you mean when we thought about with the university? Because that means that there's a value to all of the disciplines on campus and not just the ones that have their sort of time in the in the limelight. And right now, I mean, I think the industries that do have sort of the limelight are STEM fields and health sciences. And so, you know, how do you envision at least how higher ed can sell to certain industries that do maybe privilege those fields to say, you know, we want, you know, comprehensive to really mean what it means. And I mean, I guess the more direct question is, how do you sell the humanities to industries that might not value them or not think of them as highly as other industries?
Yeah, these are all such great questions, really, and I think they're just spot on. It's some of the most fascinating, really, in some ways, formidable challenges, but also most important opportunities in front of us. So there are a number of ways to do that. You know, I'll point to three things. One, we've told the wrong story about technology as a society when we equated it with technical. And the right story is that tech is not just technical, it is comprehensive. It's things that are cultural, it's things that are much more human oriented and humanistic. And the clear evidence of that is that anyone who looks at the biggest, most difficult fights that our society is having around technology and the biggest concerns and conflicts, the the most difficult and the most absorbing, the ones that you will read about in the headlines almost every single day, nonstop, are not about technical things. They're about the human side of technology. How do we ensure fairness? How do we create accountability? What do we do about the future of work? In other words, how do we balance automation with the need for human beings to be able to participate in the productive labor economy? In theory, if we could make it unnecessary for any humans to perform labor that actually results in a paycheck and a job, should we do that? Should we make all humans irrelevant to the productive economy? You know, so that's not a technical question. That's a human question. And all of the things that are going on with regulation, the U.S. White House administration just issued an executive order on artificial intelligence fairness and responsible AI in October 30th of this year. The EU had already been developing legislation that they just just agreed upon just a few days ago. China has moved very, very quickly to introduce regulation for generative AI and other AI systems. So that question of how we regulate is how we manage the technology. That's about our policies and about the vision of society that we want. So those are huge needs that companies have to address and that our whole society has to address. And so what the first order of business is that we have to change the story that we tell. Tech is not just technical. We have to, one way to sell humanities to elevate its value proposition, to help employers, companies and government for that matter, to understand the need for humanistic skills and expertise in the technology frontier, is to emphasize the connection between the biggest things that we're fighting about, which are on the human side of tech, and the greatest need for skills to address those problems, which is the human side of tech. If you think you can just take the math majors and say, oh, well, we'll just let all the engineering majors handle the regulation, you're going to just reproduce the problem that we have. And the problem is that we've not included talent across all of our areas of expertise and knowledge and disciplines. And I think as we continue to go down the path of having to operate in an environment where now there are legal demands and compliance requirements that are going to put pressure on companies to do certain things on the human side of tech so that they can operate, I think companies are going to have to pay attention to the human skill. It's either that or they're not going to be able to commercialize their products and their services. And I think what we then have to do at our higher institutions is to say, okay, and this is why the question that you opened with is so important. How do we do this together? That is our higher ed institutions and our industry sector. How do we get our students and our faculty who teach the human skills, who specialize in those higher level learning skills that concern empathy and very complex problem solving on the human side? How do we get them to help prepare that talent? We have to develop that, because I think that our companies are going to be forced, they're already being forced, to address that human side with people who have expertise on the human side. And finally, I think we have to change some of what we're doing. So at Virginia Tech, we've been developing and have just launched something called the Leadership Institute for Technology. As far as we can tell, it's the world's first executive program in humanities. And if there are others out there, please email me or tell me about it. I'd love to meet with other people who are doing this. But we've designed an executive level program. It's 1 year for mid to senior level leaders in technology to study humanities. And the response that we've gotten has been amazing. We have people from 4 different continents who are our first group of fellows in this program, who are devoting their time and their money and their energy to study humanities, because what they recognize is that humanities cultivates those higher level skills of learning. And this is being led by Rishi Jaitley, who has been a very effective leader in technology, who's also a humanities supporter and humanities expert, and he has led the creation of this institute. And the point of that is that when you move beyond the 18 to 22 year olds or 17 to 22 year olds, and when you open up the opportunity for people across the life spectrum to be able to study humanities, you actually get people who've had the time to be more reflective, who have the ability to decouple the pressure on how am I going to get a paycheck, to decouple that pressure from their intellectual curiosity. And most of us can do that more easily as we get older. And as we create more opportunities for people who are not just 17 to 21 years old to study humanities, I think what we'll find is there are actually lots of people who would love to study humanities. And many of them are running these companies. They're senior leaders. And I know that because we have a group of them who are in the first class of our Leadership Institute for Technology. And it's going really well. They really wanted to study this. They find it very gratifying. They see the value contribution innately for its own knowledge for knowledge sake, as we love to say in academia, but also for helping them to cultivate those higher level skills that they need to be truly effective leaders. So I think if we can think across those areas of how do we imagine the so-called market for higher education, it needs to be open to more people. It needs to be delivered in a way that's accessible to more people. And if we think about some of the hardest problems that our society is dealing with, which are on the human side, and some of the practical effects, again, everybody's going to have to address these regulatory issues. I think those things can help us to generate more ways to do what you've asked about, and that is to demonstrate more effectively the value of comprehensive and particularly of humanistic knowledge and expertise.
Mhm. Well, absolutely. I think about just human beings, and I thought about this a lot. We like to silo our ideas because maybe it's easier to digest if we're just going to focus on one priority in our mind or one focus. And I see this with students where like, oh, I'm not good at math, and so I'm never going to consider anything in math, or I'm not good at English. I hear that a lot because I teach English, but and then they immediately disqualify certain disciplines from their mind, and I'm just going to focus in on this, and I really want to embrace this idea of hopefully comprehensive means that we're all pretty excited about all of the disciplines. We might focus in on one, but hey, I wouldn't mind knowing a little bit more about chemistry and biology. It's not my field, but I'm pretty excited about it. And hopefully other people are excited about psychology and history, and it becomes a larger understanding of the world as opposed to isolated, experts.
Yeah, when you talk about this idea of tech being comprehensive, and I think that's a great concept for us here at Utah Tech to think about because of the nature of our mission statement and this attempt to incorporate all these things. When you were here in November, the morning of your talk, I got into my car and Tom Williams was introducing you for the radio segment. And he said, my guest today is a man who thinks the moment for the humanities is in front of us. Is this the kind of thing that you're talking about, that this kind of demand is going to be higher? Because you've heard a lot of people say, with this automation, with things like generative AI, the people who do some of the more technological jobs may be the ones who find themselves challenged a little bit more. I'm thinking of, not that he's an authority on the humanities, but, Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban saying, we're looking for the humanities people. Those are the people who are going to be the highly desired employees of the future. Can you talk a little bit about your vision of the moment of the humanities being in front of us?
Yeah, thanks, Franny. Appreciate that question, and your reference to Mark Cuban, I think, is really insightful because he has made that point repeatedly, and he's emphasized what will become important as AI, for example, plays a greater role in providing a lot of the technical work that needs to happen, from everything from machines now writing code, so AI can write code. Generative AI, of course, puts turbocharges on the ability of code to produce code. That doesn't mean no humans need to know any code. It means that you're going to need fewer humans to code. That's what that means. Humans will still be involved, but there will be fewer of them. And what Mark Cuban has emphasized is the importance of domain expertise. So in other words, again, let's go back, and this is nothing against math majors. I love math, and I love math majors. And I was a STEM major in undergrad. I studied chemistry. It's just me trying to explain the context. That's why I'm using the example of a math major, who writes some algorithm to perform some function for algorithmic services in the sector of healthcare. What Mark Cuban says is, well, since the AI is going to be so much better at producing a lot of that coding, Doesn't mean you don't need any humans to code again. You still need math majors, okay? The point is that we need everybody else. What you really need, what you don't want is someone who's only studied technical disciplines in math to be in charge of designing systems for healthcare. You're going to need healthcare experts. And those experts need to include many different kinds of people. It's not just a medical doctor. It's not just someone who has a degree in nursing. It's someone who understands patient-doctor interaction. That person might be a psychologist. They might be a sociologist. They might be an English major who is really skilled in communication. They take that and they understand how to go into an environment and optimize the ability of people to convey important information. It might be someone who studied languages and they recognize that in a given healthcare system or healthcare site, in a hospital, for example, depending on where you are in your part of the world, maybe 7 or 8 languages are spoken in that place. And they understand how to prepare future talent because you need translators. And I don't care what kind of AI you have. AI is great at helping us do things as long as we don't fall for the illusion that we don't need any more humans. You still need humans. So that these are ways that I think we're seeing the value of the human skills becoming more important. And Randy, I could say one more thing to try to answer that question. This is a little bit pithy and overdone, but just to make the point that as machines become better and better at doing analysis and analytic insights and coding, the only thing that's going to be left for us humans is just to be human. I mean, that's all we're going to have left. Now that's overdone. That's sort of a joke. But the point is that I do think we're going to see a greater need for structuring leadership from humanistic expertise and a greater need for people who have those I'm going to say higher level human skills that my colleague Rishi Jaitley has embedded into this Leadership Institute for Technology. Those skills are going to become more important as we create greater ability to work across teams that are more complex, multi-sided, because the fact we're having this conversation right now, we're not even in the same part of the United States. It's kind of a case in point. You could be on a production team with people who are in 3 or 4 different continents, and all of you have to work together. And the person who's going to lead that team is not someone who is only good at only technical things, but someone who's actually really good at people skills.
Yeah.
That will make or break things. And I think we're just going to become much more aware. We're going to be forced to become more aware of how important those kinds of human skills are. And we're going to become forced to become more aware that what we will need to solve these complicated problems in our society is everything. So this is not against STEM. Not saying we don't need technical. Of course we need technical. My point is, of course we need everyone. Of course we need all of these things across. So yeah, that's why I said I think that the moment is actually in front of us. I do think that we have to change how we do things as academic institutions. And I'm happy to say more about that, but I don't think we can just do what we were doing 70 years ago and say, yay, the moment for humanities is in front of us. Let's just go back to the 1930s or 1950s. Education systems always evolve. Our institutions always evolve. We always have to adjust and change and refresh and envision anew, whatever our mission is. And I think if we're committed to doing that as institutions, I think we will be very successful at meeting the demands that are on the horizon and that are already present with us.
Yeah, your words echo our very first guest on this podcast was Scott Hartley, and his book The Fuzzy and the Techie talks about this very thing, and he talked about the importance of when you have a team like the ones that you're talking about, that everyone is there as a representative, as an expert in the field that they're trained in, and you work together. It's not bringing somebody in to do something that they're not trained to do. It's not, having humanities people, the phrase he used was having humanities people become mediocre coders. That's not the answer to the question. The humanities folks and the social science folks and the STEM folks, they're all bringing their expertise, and they're working together in a collaboration of equality. So thank you for that. That, like I said, that really echoes the words of other people who've been on the podcast as well.
Thanks.
Well, so what I love about what you talked about in your talk is that we, as an institution, I mean, we get this the bad reputation, or the bad label would be it's an ivory tower, and it's a tower that is so isolated that that we don't interact with the public. And you even make the case that we're not even interacting with the world, that there's opportunities globally for higher education. And so the only thing that I was thinking about with that I was concerned about is, just because humans are humans, that I worry that if we as an American culture might be guilty of imposing cultural imperialism on other countries. This idea that, oh, well, we know best about how to learn, and so we'll come in and we'll teach you how to learn. How does institutions of higher education sort of embrace humility, where there's a mutual respect of cultures when you're going into other countries?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Go ahead.
Oh no, yes, that you keep going. You go.
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. Thanks for that, because it points to the importance of really being thoughtful and deliberate about elevating full participation and rejecting this hubris-ridden and very harmful model of structuring relationships where I'm the one who's gonna deliver all the value based on everything I think, and you're just supposed to sit there and pay for consuming whatever I'm gonna come up with. So there are many ways to do this, so that as education is expanding and as the population of people who are being served by institutions becomes more equitable and more inclusive in its delivery, that we're not creating a problem that you just described, but we're taking a particular kind of cultural set of biases and packaging that as some kind of objective way that everyone needs to learn and do. And it's really something that a lot of cultural theorists decades ago called enculturation, as opposed to cultural imperialism. It's where you create and structure, and you have to be deliberate opportunities for people who are receiving services, in this case, who are the students in some educational system, that population is also participating as agents in shaping whatever the thing is that's getting delivered, and in particularly its norms. And a very practical way to do this, our if so the birth rate in the United States has been negative since the 1970s. The only thing that has kept us going in terms of our talent for anything, like you name it, agriculture, healthcare, education, is immigration, is the fact that people come to the United States from other parts of the world. So our universities and our companies have something in common that was not obvious to me years ago, and then once I was made to recognize it, I wondered how I'd missed it. And one is that our talent has always been global in education, higher ed, and companies, and our markets have always been global. Okay, so if you look at most colleges and universities in the United States, you will see professionals, experts from all over the world. The world is already at our universities in the United States. You can find people from Nigeria, from Iran, from China, from South Africa, like name your country, Mexico, and they have already brought with them a certain understanding of how to create things. Look at our companies, and a lot of the technology that we call American technology is being created by people who are not from the United States. And we would be dishonest with ourselves if we say, oh, well, they got a PhD from X university in the United States, and that means that their ideas are United States ideas. No, these are human beings who bring their whole selves. Like if I went to another country and I went to a school somewhere, that doesn't erase me. It it's me engaging with what that is. And so I think if we recognize that fact that what we have is already in great measure a product of the world, even if we like to say it's American, the truth is that it's already a product of that helps us to see some possible ways that any university in the US can serve more of the human population. Hire if you're, and I'm just making up this example, if you are creating more service of education, just gonna make up a country. I'm gonna say, I don't know, Ghana. I'm just gonna name a country. There's lots of talent in Ghana to be instructors and teachers. It's you don't have to assume, well, we're just gonna take Sylvester Johnson, who's from Mississippi in the United States, and he's gonna be the expert in Ghana. There's lots of great talent in Ghana that could be hired. And that's not the only way to do that, but I love the question that you're asking because um, the global talent and market space are actually things that have been very powerful characteristics of higher ed institutions and of private companies. And I'm used to thinking about higher ed and private companies as very different kinds of things, and they are, but they also have some interesting things in common. And so as the need for education, for learning, for upskilling, for reskilling, for what people call workforce development, as that becomes greater and greater and greater, instead of fretting over the fact that we don't have enough students in the United States for our United States colleges and universities, I do think we need to, if we're going to continue to exist at these institutions, I think we need to say, well, we should be in service to the whole world. And we already have lots of students from other countries coming to our universities here. They have to get through our immigration barriers, which are not becoming easier. They're becoming more difficult. And the faculty we hire, we've already had, what if we, they're already part of the world. What if we just take that and do it in a very thoughtful way globally? So thanks for that question.
Well, I was going to ask you something completely different than what we've talked about, but I wanted to relate back. And I didn't even share this question with Randy. So you're probably going to be surprised about this.
Surprise me.
Well, this time of year, so I'm always really excited to build my book list this time of year. It's around Christmas, and I might actually have some time to read books. And I was looking over your bio, and you have a lot of expertise with theology and religion. And I was pretty excited about some of your books. I'd love to check them out. And I want to see if you have a sort of a connection. I mean, if you have insights about how theology and religion connect to, the future workforce, the student, because sometimes we get very, I don't know if the right word is sort of sterile in our viewpoint of, the student is just going to be this employee and that's all they're going to be. And yet we know that people go to churches, people have a sort of spiritual viewpoint, and they're not just this type of employee. And so how do you see those sort of things intersect? Because I was just curious looking at your bio and what you've talked about previously and then this particular topic.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the ways that I see those connections, and I'll name a couple of them. One is I'm writing a book now that is tentatively titled "Robots Have Souls," and it's basically asking a question of, the title is meant to be very playful, and the question is really about what can things do, and what are people? Are people things? Okay, so grammatically in English we have uh, that for things and who for people. This idea of personhood is that things are not people and that people are not things. And so the history of theological formations across many different traditions of Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, Orisha traditions of Orisha devotion, so African indigenous religions, Native American indigenous religions. There's so many different ways of coming at that. There's not a single answer to that kind of question. And I think that the advent of the informational machine technologies, AI, artificial intelligence, algorithmic systems, they're recreating a new instance of a classic question. And I'm sure you've seen or heard this come up because when ChatGPT and other large language models like Bard begin to hit the commercial space, one of the things that many experts begin to say is, well, machines don't actually know anything. These AI systems don't know anything. They're not conscious. I don't know if you remember the Google researcher who was fired by Google because he kept claiming that one of Google's algorithms was actually conscious and sentient. And Google kept saying that don't go around telling people this, it's just software, it's just doing math. But the question is not going to go away. It's in these new forms, it's actually going to become more urgent as humans get combined with machine systems. So I'll give you one hypothetical example that's based on actual research. DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has funded the development of brain implants. It's a chip that can be implanted into the brain in order to treat people who have suffered traumatic brain injury, particularly U.S. soldiers. And so already and their early forms of these have already been implanted into people to allow them to, for example, move an arm or a leg that they had lost movement of due to traumatic brain injury. So and they're experimenting with the ability to transfer memories to these chips and thoughts of these chips, okay, so that people can have restored speech capacity. If they've had memory loss, it can be restored. So 10 years from now or 20 years from now, if I were to get a brain chip that controlled part of the neural processing that helped me to experience what we may call love or emotion, would anyone question my humanity? Would they say, well, Sylvester's brain, is kind of a part chip. He's not really capable of love. So he shouldn't be allowed to have a family or to adopt any kids or anything like that. So that's one question. And that's just a very practical way that something that can at first seem far-fetched, that people have been talking about for thousands of years. What can things do? And are people things? And if we're not, can a thing experience love or emotion? Is actually going to generate some real legal, political consequences. And then the other thing I would say about the history of these religious theological systems is that so I love to have students read Aristotle's work, and he wrote lots of different kinds of things. And that's sort of my point, some in what we would call political theory, others in things that we would call biology, other things we would call philosophy. And one of his most fascinating texts is referred to in its Latin title, De Anima, that he wrote, of course, the entitled translated The Soul, but he wrote Perisuches. Suches is the Greek for psyche, which is the translated the soul. But in this work, he was trying to explain what makes things alive. And if you look at all the things that he wrote about or others in that tradition, if we were to hire Aristotle to work at our universities today, I'll put it this way: we would never be able to decide in which college or department to put him. We wouldn't know if he belonged in humanities or engineering or biology or chemistry or physics. And he would look at us and say, why are you trying to split me up? Why do you have knowledge divided into all these different buildings and parts of government? And I think that is actually useful to think with and say, well, for thousands of years, people had a very holistic way of coming at problems and trying to explain them. And I love having students to read these texts so that they can just appreciate the fact that we have really chopped up knowledge today. We've divided it up. And I think there's something useful about making space to include a more synthetic, in terms of synthesis, a more synthetic way, or comprehensive or transdisciplinary way of engaging with really big questions that people are actually fascinated by and interested in. So those are two ways that I see the connections between these things.
That's great. I'm so glad I asked that question because I was a little worried. I was worried that you were just saying, "Oh, well, it's completely separate disciplines in my world." I don't let them join. No, I think it really enhanced. I mean, what you're saying about how this concept of comprehensive industry, comprehensive student, comprehensive higher education. I mean, I always kind of think it's funny that, the more technology that we create, the more people kind of go, oh, well, like we're moving away from religion or theological systems. And then the first thing that people always say is we're playing God. And I'm like, so what is this concept of God that you're talking about? And why is God come into this conversation? So all good.
Yeah, no, those are fascinating histories. I think that, the other thing about studying religion, given its powerful effect on the world, as you just pointed out, people don't care less about religion today. They're whole human beings who care about many different kinds of things. And that certainly includes religion and its, more the theological, philosophical traditions around that, and its more cultural aspects. I think we need to have more literacy and public understanding of religion. And because these are very complicated, complex global systems that have a huge impact on the world, and they are part of how people live in the world. And it's like studying other things. It's like saying, well, I don't want to know anything about politics. Well, if you ignore the fact that politics actually plays a role in the world, it actually affects how people think and what they do and how their institutions work. You don't have to agree with someone else's politics, but you should at least understand that it is a real force in the world that is something people should know about, and they should understand, because it helps us to be able to interpret human behavior and help us to I think, having empathy for people when you know more about how the world works and how people approach it. And it's like other things in that sense. And then, as we were just talking about, there's some really fascinating classic questions that are embedded in these traditions that they're classic because they're not going to go away. They're still going to be with us. And it's really, for me, it's fun to think through and to talk about.
Sylvester, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for continuing some of the conversations that we've been having over the past couple of months. And we've really appreciated having you here in all of the visits that you've made. And Jim and I enjoyed talking to you today. So giving us a lot to think about, and that's always a good thing. And giving us a lot to shoot for as we try to fulfill our institution's mission, which is, a challenge, and a challenge that, we enjoy, trying to help along, I told you earlier, I'm giving a final after this. I mean, it's the interaction with the students, that is the most important, because of all the things we're talking about today, because of all the potential for the future that exists for the people that we come in contact with and the people that we teach. And we appreciate you giving us more to think about when it comes to that. So thanks for joining us on this version of the Being Human UT podcast. I'm Randy Jasmine, and for my partner, Jim Hendigas, we'll say, see you next time.
This has been the Being Human UT podcast with Dr. Randy Jasmine and Dr. Jim Hendigas. Please follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. From Utah Tech University, this is the Being Human UT podcast.